Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of this show I have yet to name. So again, down in the comments, if you can think of what I should be calling these interview shows on here, please let me know, because the Boudoir Guild show just doesn't have a ring to it, you know? Maybe we'll throw in like a bonus coaching session for whoever comes up with the coolest name. Anywho, I am stoked. I am here with Nathan Holritz from the Boceh Podcast. I was on his show. I don't remember when we recorded that or when it went live. It went live this week, early February 2023. And we got to talk a lot about AI and how to use it for marketing. And we just had such an incredible conversation. And then like a half hour after the show, and we're both like, I still got a work day. Otherwise, we could sit here and chat all day. So we are back for round two to basically have a book club meeting with you. But before we dive into that, Nathan, why don't you tell us a little more about how you ended up where you are?
Well, I started in photography about 20 years ago. It was a hobby that turned into a profession, wedding, engagement, portrait photography. During that time, I started a company, this is back in 2008, called Photographer's Edit. I was shooting as many as 30 to 40 weddings a year, and I needed help with the post-production. There wasn't a great solution at the time. Simultaneously, I saw a business opportunity and also the opportunity to free up my life as an entrepreneur a little bit more too in the long run. So I started Photographer's Edit at that point. Since, as you mentioned, started the Boceh Podcast as well. And now we're actually getting ready to launch another company in the next few weeks or so that is going to be playing still in the photography industry, but in the consumer space. Yeah. And we'll be announcing some more details about that here pretty soon.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And I think that summarizes that you're not a photographer, you're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And that is not a skill that any of us are born with. I mean, some of us might have a knack for something business related, but we have to learn how to start and grow businesses more or less detached from the actual service or product that the business provides. And one of the ways that we can learn that is through reading books. And I found that most successful entrepreneurs are also avid readers and avid implementers, as you hinted on last time when we were talking about how many books a year we read. Before we dive into what we're doing, I love that you specified that, like, I love to read, but I also want to make sure I'm actually implementing the things I'm reading before I just plow into the next book. Was that always the case?
No, I didn't. I guess I didn't really have that awareness, but realized more and more, probably in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, the significance of doing. You know, it's one thing to talk. We can all kind of talk trash and talk a big game. It's another thing to do it. And the same applies when it comes to actually reading something or consuming any kind of content, really, because we're lucky enough to have access to just endless amounts of content for free, or at least mostly so. And so we kind of go there, but I think a lot of that times we even use that as a crutch. Like if we don't want to go do the hard work, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that we should be doing, it's easy to say, oh, I'm reading these books, or I'm watching this YouTube video, I'm taking this course. But the question at the end of the day is, what are we actually applying? And I would actually argue that probably the top even 5 or 6 books that I've read in my lifetime, if I just applied those consistently, I do really, really well in life.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was putting together my list of books for this chat, they were like 3 of the first entrepreneur books I read back in like 2015. At least when I got my Audible account, that I like scrolled through my entire history to just refresh. And they were like 3 of the first, 6, 7 books on there. And they were the ones that made the biggest impact on me that I keep revisiting. So I'm with you.
Can I ask you a question about Audible though?
Yeah.
Because Audible is not new to me in that I've not used it ever, but I've been using it more probably in the last year or so to listen to books versus actually physically reading them.
Yeah.
How do you go about effectively listening and then taking in that information in such a way that you can either easily reference it later on or just simply remember it? Because I'm having a little bit of a tough time with that. I hear something, especially when I'm driving, and I'm like, oh, I want to write something down or take a voice note or something like that. It's really not the safest thing to do at that point. How do you go about consuming Audible content or audio content effectively?
Totally. Well, I learned that I cannot just sit down and read a book. I start thinking about whatever's in the book or grocery shopping or literally anything else. And my brain just doesn't allow me to sit down and read something.
Okay.
I never studied in college. It's not how I process things. So I go for walks, and I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I have to be moving
Yes.
to do that. So I don't really have a choice. But one cool thing about Audible is you can bookmark sections and take notes. So that was one thing I found, like if I'm on a plane or something, I don't have my laptop or whatever, I can just mark that section, type in a little note, and I can go back and revisit that later. Or the voice notes, like you said, I'll also email myself from my phone. I'll pause it. I'll write myself an email so I know it'll be on my desktop computer and I can think more about it later. That's really how I do it.
I love that. And, you know, honestly, I didn't realize that I could take notes in the Audible app, but I would probably stand to do a lot better listening to those books, like you said, on a walk. I can remember at least one book in particular that had a massive impact on my life. I did consume it on audio, and I can remember specifically the park where I was walking, listening to that book. So, yeah, I may have to go that route versus just simply listening in the car.
Yeah. And both ways, right? Who was it? Brian Tracy talked about, you know, your car being the best university education you could ever get because of all the opportunity. I mean, he referenced books on tape, just shows you when he recorded it, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah.
So if, you know, you're not worrying, if you're not thinking this episode might be for you because you don't just sit down and read books, then hard same. You know, I read almost 100 books in 2019, but I did 70,000 miles of travel. I had a lot of sitting down time where all I could do was read. And normally in a year, I'm at like 40 to 50. But, you know, I mix in fiction and other things too. So I can still be consuming that content without taking away from that time where I should be implementing and critically thinking about the content that I've already consumed. So,
I'm taking notes myself now. I appreciate the guide and the reference.
Of course. So how we're going to do the show today, we've each picked out a few different books that made a big impact on us that we want to share with you and also give practical takeaways. Because Nathan, as you mentioned, yeah, we can talk strategy and high-level philosophy all day long, but if we're not actually in the trenches using this stuff and applying it practically, then it's just another form of procrastination. So that is our goal, is to make this as actionable as possible and to inspire you to hopefully get out and read some more books. And I'm going to have a linked blog post. We're going to have all 6 of our books, or however many we end up with, on that page so that you can jump right over to Amazon and get them in an ebook, a paperback or Audible version, whatever works best for you and how you consume these books. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah,
why don't you lead things off for us?
Okay, fair enough. And it's funny, actually, this just hit me as we were talking about audiobooks.
Yeah.
And certainly the convenience of audiobooks too. We can consume them in a variety of locations. This particular book, I love so much. It doesn't exist on audio. I loved it so much that I actually reached out to the author on social media and asked them if I could record the audiobook so I could listen to it just as a review.
Yeah.
It's actually an ebook.
Okay.
And we can find the link. I can send you the link, Mike. If you Google it, though, the title is called Reawaken the Giant Within.
Okay.
And it's just a PDF download. They used to have it available for Kindle as well. It may still be the case. Tony Robbins wrote this book, and I know different people have different opinions on Tony Robbins, but I have to say that in all the reading that I've done over the years, I have yet to consume any content around human psychology that is as easy to understand, to follow, and to apply as the way that Tony Robbins packages psychological principles. And I would call this really a psychological handbook for life. And the cool thing is it's only 100 pages long. Like I said, it's free as well. You just go Google it and download it.
Cool.
But I would say that this has certainly been one of the most impactful books in my life, to the extent that I even have some tattoos on the inside of my wrist as a result of consuming this content. So actually the first version of this book was called Awaken the Giant Within, and there's physical copies available. I still don't think there's an audio version.
Okay.
It was like a 700-page book. I don't even recommend that one. Just go to the 100-page version. It's a lot easier for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's free. But the original version, I got through about half of it, and it had such a dramatic impact on my life. And this is about 10 years ago, not long after my ex and I split, and I was just going through a lot of life change. And it had such a massive impact on me. And one of a couple of big ideas that Tony talks about in that book. One is the significance of values. And we hear that word thrown around quite a bit. For me, what values means, at least in my own life anyway, and certainly the way, very similar to what Tony describes in the book, is there are these ideals that we find bring the most fulfillment to us, And I would add to that, these are ideals that I'm also striving for on a daily basis. When somebody talks about me, if I'm not around or if I pass away and somebody's talking about Nathan, oh, Nathan was fill in the blank, I want them to at least name off 2 or 3 of the values. I have 12 in particular that are most meaningful to me, but I have found certainly bring fulfillment to my life, but I also realize add a lot of value to those around me as well.
Yeah.
And Tony gets into detail about the significance of values, what that actually means, what it can mean to our lives if we're willing to apply it. And so that's kind of the first big idea that he shares, and I can't recommend enough. Those listening in would read the book for that purpose. But then the other, and going back to these tattoos, 2 of my values are 2 principles that he talks about in that book. One is the significance of belief. And, you know, as much as people say love makes the world go around, I think it's actually belief that really makes the world go around. Literally everything that we do on a day-to-day basis is driven by this concept called a belief or a set of beliefs. A lot of times that word is associated with religion, religious belief. And of course, there's a lot more to it than that. I sit down in a chair because I believe it's going to hold me up, and hopefully that's accurate. But in other cases, unfortunately, in my life, I've bought into a belief or set of beliefs that have been harmful to me. And we have the ability to ultimately decide on our beliefs, to choose, and that's the kanji tattoo on my right wrist. By the way, the Japanese word is sentaku. For belief, it's kakushin. And I have the ability to choose the belief or set of beliefs that I want to subscribe to, and that ultimately will drive my emotions, or my thoughts rather, which will drive my emotions, which will then drive my actions. And so, I mean, I could keep going, but those are 2 big ideas that Tony shares in the book, and I just can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. So for the person sitting at home who's thinking, how does this make me a better photographer? I want to learn how to be a photographer. How does this apply to them?
I love it. And yeah, that's a great question, great pushback. So the reality is that at the end of the day, root level, we're human beings, right? We're human beings before we are photographers. And our personal, mental, and physical health translates dramatically to what we can and will do as business owners.
Yeah.
A lot of the principles that Tony talks about in that particular book are highly applicable to us as business owners as well. But really, if we're going to be an effective business owner, it starts with being a great human being. And the principles, the tools that he gives you in that book will give you a big, big step in that direction.
Love it. So how can we make that actionable? What can someone go do today to implement that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think maybe just I want to leave everybody with a question, which is, if you feel something, our culture is built around the significance of feelings. We've given a lot of significance to feelings. And I'll actually come back to this when I talk about the next book, but we've made this kind of drastic shift, right? The first 80%, 90% of our country's history, we suppressed feelings. That was kind of the tendency. And then in the last 10 years or so, 15 years or so, the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, and we give so much significance to how we feel.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, those feelings, though, are driven by a belief or set of beliefs. And so the next time you're having a hard time with something, take a step back, kind of outside of yourself, outside of that situation, and ask, what is it that I believe about this person or about this experience or even about this feeling?
Yeah.
What is it that I believe about that? Which ultimately is what's driving how we feel about that situation or that experience or that person. And start to do a bit of deep dive homework, if you will. Rather than just simply writing it off that this is how I feel or quote unquote, this is who I am. The reality is we have the tools necessary to be able to dig into that and to make change. We can choose to change the belief or set of beliefs that make us feel this particular way and ultimately enable us to live a much happier life and as well be a much better business owner. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to ask that question. What do I believe about this?
Love it. And yeah, being able to change, I mean, it's inherently there already. And so if we choose to say, this is who I am, that's the end of the conversation, then you've made the choice to acknowledge that that you're not willing to change. You're not willing to look at other perspectives. You're not willing to rethink the relationship you have with yourself and with others. The choice is there one way or the other. So you might as well do the thing that best serves you. And it might feel like, well, no, because if I'm not me, if I had to change who I am, then I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough already, that I'm faulty somehow. But that there is no good, smart, perfect. We're just always evolving. And I think as soon as you make the choice to never evolve, that's the only point at which you can lose.
I would agree. But you're a bit of an anomaly, Mike, that you would even make that statement that we're always evolving. I don't think that a lot of our culture tends to think that way, or at least consciously.
Yeah.
The assumption, again, with that pendulum swing, is to assume that, you know, how we feel is how we are, or who we are. Or more specifically, we are a particular person. You know, we want to find out what the Enneagram number is, or the personality type is, right. Or we want to label ourselves as introverts or extroverts. And it's very safe to be able to find a label that represents how we or who we are, quote unquote,
right,
and just live there.
Yep.
The reality is those labels, those numbers, those personality types, they all represent behavioral patterns. And those behavioral patterns are rooted in a set of beliefs that we ultimately have the ability to choose to change if we want to.
Yeah.
And it takes, you know, owning the fact that it is our responsibility. A lot of people don't tend to want to do that. And I get it. It's uncomfortable. And I can certainly speak from personal experience in that regard.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is it's super empowering once you realize, oh, I actually have the ability to choose how to, and again, kind of playing to the next book I'm going to share about, but I get to choose how to engage with these thoughts. I get to choose how to engage with these feelings. And I ultimately get to choose the belief system that frames those thoughts and feelings so that ultimately I can very well, as much as it sounds like a cliche, I can be the person that I want to be. I have the ability to choose that. And again, that has far reaching effects, not just in our personal life, but ultimately in our ability as a business owner as well.
Yeah. Because if you run an ad campaign and no one responds, that doesn't mean you're a bad marketer. That doesn't mean you're a terrible photographer. That means, all right, that message didn't resonate, but I'm the kind of person who's going to crack this code because I have something good to give to the world. And it's the exact same scenario with two different belief systems, and we get to choose which one of those we adopt. So if you're like, cool, what's with all this touchy-feely stuff? I'm like, it helps you be a better marketer because it makes you more resilient. So there you go. If you want something more gritty.
Yeah, well, I think it's easy a lot of times for us in the industry. And by the way, I could spend literally hours, you know this from our conversation the other day, hours talking about business principles. And we certainly can. And I certainly have a number of business books that I can also suggest or recommend. But who we are ultimately, and I say that loosely, but who we are, the person that we're trying to be, that we want to be, that ultimately drastically affects, or should, I think, affect the way that we're running our business. A lot of people want to go immediately to business and figure out why something's not working, or what they should do, or what photography they should specialize in, or what style they should edit in, or all these other kind of very surface level questions. And really what we need to do to answer a lot, if not most of those questions, is take a step back and go a lot deeper personally. And once we're clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish as individuals, where we want to go as individuals, then making the decisions for the sake of our business is a lot easier, because we can run all those decisions through the filter of, this is my value set and these are my goals. Everything else can just kind of fall into place underneath that.
And it will.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. Well, we could easily fill the entire episode on this book, I'm sure.
Yes, 100%.
All right. So I'm going to actually call an audible here. I had my 3 picked out, but I can't believe I didn't think of this one in the original batch. I'm going to go with Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill, which you think the title, Think and Grow Rich, is like one of the clickbaitiest titles of any book. Yeah. But it was the first business/personal development book ever written. It's about 100 years old. And it came out before we had, what's the clickbaity? BuzzFeed. Before we had BuzzFeed, right? So this wasn't just to get Facebook clicks and stuff. And this book came about, a guy named Andrew Carnegie. Maybe you've heard of him. He offered a position, an unpaid position, to a number of people and said, I will give you this golden ticket to go around and meet all of these successful people, all these millionaires at the time. In the early 1900s, millionaire was a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. And he wanted someone to go write a book on what they all had in common, what the keys to success were. And again, like this didn't exist yet. No one had done this. And this guy named Napoleon Hill, he was a reporter. He walked into Carnegie's office. Carnegie gave him the pitch. And he said, well, what do you want to do? Yes or no? And it's like a 3-year gig. It is totally unpaid. You want in or not? And Hill sat there, and eventually he said yes. And then Carnegie pulled a stopwatch out of his pocket. He had like 3 seconds left before the timer went off, because like 90 something other people had been in that chair before him and either took too long or said no. So Napoleon Hill got the gig. He went around, interviewed, the founder of Coca-Cola, Henry Ford, Benjamin Franklin, all of these people, and put together the first book on how to succeed in business, which, as you might find a common theme today, is really just how to succeed as a person in life, because everything we do in life is what we do in business. So one of my favorite stories from that, it's the first chapter of the book, is called 3 Feet from Gold. And after I read this chapter, I drove down and I got 3 Feet from Gold tattooed down my side. That's when you shared your tattoos.
That's awesome.
I can't believe I didn't think of this in the first place. And it was about a gold miner named R.U. Darby. He was a lawyer from Boston. And in the 1860s, he went out to California. No, maybe it was the Colorado Gold Rush in the 1880s. One of the two. He went out there to look for gold. And, like everybody, they show up in town. They have no idea what they're doing. And he ended up getting a little piece of land and went out and actually found some gold. And there was too much for him to be able to excavate. So he went back home and he told all of his friends and family what was going on. He needed capital to invest in more mining equipment and crews. All these people pitched in a ton of money. He went and hired crews, bought all this mining equipment. They excavated cartload after cartload of gold out of this area. And then the gold just stopped. Like, end of the line, just hauling out dirt. And he's like, there's got to be more. Like, it can't just end. And he spent all the rest of his working capital digging out dirt, basically, and eventually got to the point where he was going to go bankrupt. And so he went into town, and this junk collector was walking into the bar where he was. And he's like, dude, I got this land. I got all this equipment. I'll give it to you for a couple $100. And so the junk collector bought it. He went out there. He's like, I don't know anything about mining. What am I even doing? So he went and hired a surveyor to go take a look at the land and give him an idea of what he was actually working with. And the surveyor found a fault line running through the land. And so he's like, you can see like gold grows in a vein. The fault line shifted everything. He's like, just move your stuff over 3 feet and you should tap back into it. And he did. And he became one of the millionaires that was interviewed in this book. And that's why it's 3 feet from gold. And when did I read this? 2010. That was the year that I had started my business. And I never wanted to forget the lesson that whenever I get into a situation, like I still get goosebumps from the story. Whenever I get into this situation where I don't know what I'm doing, but I have no reason to not succeed here. There's somebody else who knows what I need to be doing. And I just need to go ask. And, it took maybe 7.5, 8 years for this to like totally come to fruition. And I decided at one point that I really wanted to start hanging out with millionaires and billionaires to figure out how these people approach and run businesses. So I bought a plane ticket to San Diego, California, and I got invited to an event. I had no idea what it was, who was going to be there, what was going to go on, but I heard it was for high-performing entrepreneurs. So I flew down there, and one of the guys giving a presentation named Dr. Greg S. Reed, who has become my mentor over the last several years, he's giving this presentation, and he's handing out copies of his books, and he holds one book up called 3 Feet from Gold. And I'm like, I got to meet this guy, like he titled his book the same as my tattoo. And I walked up to him at the end and he had this big crowd around him. He was signing autographs and stuff. And I just parted the Red Sea, walked right up to him. And I said, I need to meet you. Why did you call your book 3 Feet from Gold? And he worked with the Napoleon Hill Foundation. He basically did another version of Think and Grow Rich where he interviewed billionaires or at least people worth 100 million and how they got to where they were. And he's like, oh, you've read my book. Cause I like lifted up my shirt. I'm like, 3 feet from gold.
Like, what's this guy doing?
Right? He's like, oh, you're a big fan of my book. I'm like, I've never heard of your book. I've never heard of you, but I read Napoleon Hill. And he's like, okay. And we just like left the crowd, went outside to chat. I started doing his photography. He started bringing me to all of his events where I've got to meet presidents and founders of all these famous companies that are everyday names in our homes. And that totally transformed my world and meeting all of these people. And just because I decided, you know what, I don't know how to get myself to the next level, I'm going to go somewhere where I can ask.
Yeah.
And it happened to be the title of the chapter that I had tattooed on me that was like the sign, the universe being like, this is the guy you need to ask. And it like tripled my revenue in the next year. Like everything just exploded when I got into his community. So,
do you recommend, I mean, you hear this, what's the phrase or the quote? You are the equivalent of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, or something like that. And I'm in a mastermind where this has been kind of a point of conversation as well. I feel like as I'm even saying this, I realize it's kind of an excuse in the end, but I feel like I'm so head down busy that the idea of simultaneously making time to go spend, like intentionally go find these people to connect with would be a bit challenging. I mean, I love the story that you just described, but do you have any specific suggestions as to how to connect with those types of people based on your experience so far?
Yeah. It's like marketing. It's figure out who our target audience is and where are they hanging out. How do I reach them? So whether there's local, meetup groups or Facebook groups that get together, business book clubs, maybe there's alumni associations. There's a group called Club Core. They own country clubs, but also business networking clubs all over America. I think North America, maybe worldwide. Anyway, like we've got the Capital Club here in Silicon Valley. There's University Club in San Diego, California. Like they're all over the place, and you go and it's just for people in business who want to network and meet other like-minded people. And you pay a monthly membership and you can go to all these different events and just be around like-minded people. And then you just talk. You're like, hey, I'm looking to go to events. What should I go to? That to me has been the most effective way to do it. Or join a local nonprofit, because these are people who want to give back to the community, and that's one of my values. And people who are board members of nonprofits are generally higher up in companies. They make enough money that they have free time to support something that they're passionate about. And they're probably well connected, because I'm sure it's not their first rodeo. And that is also actually at a consult call this morning. I booked a senior session for someone that I used to volunteer with at a nonprofit a couple of years ago. So
the other question I have about that, I'd be very cognizant interacting with these people, knowing that they have accomplished what they have and they're where they're at in life and as entrepreneurs and whatnot, that I'm taking from them, but not adding value to their life as well. Is that something that you're thinking about? And if so, like, how do you effectively add value to their lives through this interaction?
Yeah, that was absolutely on my mind. I had total imposter syndrome when I started going to these events. But like you referred to, we're all just people first before anything else. And I don't bring up business right away. We go in there and I'm just having a conversation with somebody, I don't know, maybe their phone case had a sports team on it, or they've got a picture of their dog on their phone, something. And I just start a conversation. Yeah. And eventually you get to what do you do? And like, I'm a therapist of the camera. I'm a storyteller. I'm a photographer. I'm a whatever it is that we do. And then you can go into that, but you got to connect as people first. And, there was that event that I specifically, or there was another event that I went to. It was a $3,000 ticket for me to go. I maxed out my last credit card, but I brought all my camera gear with me. I drove 10 hours to get to it. And I showed up and I just started talking to people, and turns out a lot of them needed branding photography. And I ended up booking enough sessions that week while I was there. Just, I didn't have my camera. I didn't introduce myself as the photographer. There were other photographers at the event, but they didn't talk to anybody. And I was just there to connect with people, not take pictures. And that booked me a ton of work. And then I got known as the goth dude at all these events who could take really cool pictures of everybody. Yeah. From White House staff to, I don't know, movie stars. I've got to do some pretty cool stuff because I connected with them as people first, and we're all on the same playing field there. So if you look at it transactionally, then you're adding up a score. But I didn't look at it that way because I also am not trying to book every single person I meet. We might not be a good fit. I'd rather go into it, who can I introduce you to? What are you looking for? Maybe I can help in that way. Maybe I already met somebody earlier or had a friend on Facebook or something. I can make a connection. That was my focus first. How can I connect them with somebody else? And if I happen to be a fit for whatever they need, that's just an added bonus.
I love that. And I'm kind of cringing a little bit, almost in guilt, thinking, yeah, transactional. That's a great point. Like, this isn't simply about a transaction. I love connecting with people. I love conversation. So that's not necessarily at the forefront of my mind, but I think shifting that to the back and really focusing just on the relationship, leading with a focus on the relationship, the personal connection. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like how I connected with Greg. The title of his book was My Tattoo, and I didn't think like, well, what can I learn from him today? I just knew like I got to figure out who this guy is and what he even does, what he's all about. And we started chatting, and I said, do you ever need any branding photos? And he's like, well, yeah, I actually need a new photographer. I'm like, cool. I'd be happy to do all of your photos for you if, you could also mentor me while we're doing these sessions. He's like, done. And that was it. And I was making a 10-hour drive back and forth at the time to go in and do like a day-long photo shoot with him. But each time he would bring new friends. And like I got to watch the Super Bowl with Brian Smith, the founder of UGG Boots, and Alex Stern, inventor or created Constant Contact. I did a shoot for the guy who was on the development or, created Kajabi, where we host like most of our e-courses and stuff like that. And it was like I was sitting at the table with him like, I've seen you somewhere before. And he's like, oh, we invented this company. I'm like, oh, I use Kajabi to sell my courses. I watched your training videos where you demoed how to do this stuff. And then I ended up doing his photos for the book he released. And it's just, we connected as people first.
Totally makes sense.
So we're all in the same playing field. And I didn't feel like I was taken, but that, like you said, it was a huge mindset shift.
I get it. I'm already learning. This is good.
Yeah. All right. What's your next one?
Book number 2. Well, honestly, I had all non-business books listed out, but as we were talking about business, I'm like, okay, I'll throw out something business related. So here's one for everybody. And I know it's kind of made the rounds, but again, like a lot of content consumed, I'm not sure how often it's actually or how consistently it's applied. It's a book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And the reason it carries so much significance, especially as it relates to the photography industry, I spend a lot of time through my podcast talking to photographers, looking at websites, and even doing brand position consultations, helping them establish clear and distinct messaging that will enable them to stand out in their marketplace. Yeah. A lot of photographers are focused on a conversation, shall we say, that is relevant to the photography industry, and it's not focused on communicating how they're going to serve the client. They're focused on talking about themselves as photographers, their backstory, what they're interested in, what they like. And I realize the intention, it's to connect on a personal level. But again, much like so many things, the pendulum has swung so far, we've gone to this extreme, this kind of obsessive conversation about ourselves, rather than a focus on the client or the potential client, those people that we're wanting to work with. And I like to use the word serve because it suggests humility and a desire to ultimately make their lives better, right? So if we truly have that heart, then there are actually some key questions that Donald Miller brings up in this book. By the way, little side note, Mike, I'm a little bit of a nerd, in case you couldn't tell yet. Not only do I rate the movies that I watch, I've rated over 1,000 movies in IMDb, but I also give a rating to the books that I read. And a 7, both for movies and books, a 7 is a recommendation, 7 and above is a recommendation. Okay. Yep. I don't think I've given any book a 10 yet. This particular book I gave a 9 out of a 10, though, just in case anybody wants some frame of reference. Okay. But there are 3 key questions that Donald brings up in the book that are, I think, important for photographers to ask themselves. Excuse me. One is, what does your customer want? And again, we talk about this a lot in the industry, on podcasts or otherwise. What is it about your target client? Get to know your target market. Understand what it is they like, what they want, how they speak, etc. But I'm not seeing that reflected so much in photographers' websites. So we first need to ask what it is that they want, or when we're approaching it from that perspective of how can we serve this client or potential client, it's how can we make their life better?
Yeah.
What is the need or desire that ultimately needs to be met? And then number two, what is the customer's challenge innate to that desire? On a very simple level, just as an example, we can think about somebody who has not been in front of the camera much, if any at all. And so they need they need headshots for their website, for example, but they're nervous about getting in front of that camera. There's a real opportunity to not only speak to the baseline need, which is headshots for their website, but also how you're going to accommodate their, I guess, ultimately their nerves, right? The apprehension associated with being in front of the camera. So what is the customer's challenge? And then three, what tool can you provide the customer to solve their challenge or their problem? In this case, we could also kind of put in there, replace that word tool with service. What service can we provide that ultimately solves that challenge or meets the need that client has? And the key here is to figure out the answers to those questions, but then translate that to a phrase that is, I like to say, no longer than 8 to 10 words. And that's where a brand position statement comes in. So if we can communicate what service we offer, how it's different than the services that the photographers in our marketplace are offering, speak maybe to the locale that we're in and even the target market if it makes sense. If we can do that in 8 to 10 words, when somebody lands on our website, that's the first thing that they see at the top of the page, not a cute picture of us drinking coffee next to a beautiful window light or talking about the camera that we got from our grandpa 80 years ago or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing innately wrong with those ideas, but it's distracted from what should be the primary focus, which is communicating how we would meet the needs of these potential clients. So if we can do that with the short phrase, the moment they land on the site, they can read that in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Above the fold, mobile site, desktop site, even if they go to the social media profile, that's the first thing they see besides their name. Then that is at least enabling us to move in the direction of capturing the attention of that potential client more effectively, rather than just simply, calling ourselves a wedding photographer, or saying something like, hopelessly inspired by love, I capture the magical memories of life's most authentic moments through the timeless beauty of natural light. I mean, imagine, just kind of put all the phrases and words in there. That's the kind of stuff that photographers are saying because that's just what they knew to do from looking at other photographers.
It worked in the 80s.
What's that?
It worked in the 80s.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
If you could write a short enough phrase to fit in the yellow pages, that
right.
might do the trick. But yeah, so that's my business book recommendation, Building a Store Brand, Donald Miller. By the way, the other thing I'll add there for anybody listening in who maybe isn't like prone to reading a ton, a lot of business books, maybe even most business books, it's kind of an 80-20 principle where you get like 80% fluff and then 20% is actual practical, applicable information. This book, I swear, is the exact opposite. It's so much helpful, practical, actionable information. It's super easy to read. I cannot recommend it enough as a business book. Probably my top business book recommendation.
Yeah. I started reading the marketing book you sent me, by the way. I'm like 1 chapter in and just loving it so far. So thank you.
Absolutely.
People.
Yeah. Donald, and for context for anybody listening in, Donald Miller wrote a second book, kind of a follow-up to Building a Story Brand called Marketing Made Simple. And he moves some of those principles from Building a Story Brand into that book, but then makes it even more practical, especially as it relates to our website, building user flow, creating a user experience that ultimately will help increase conversion. So that's another great recommendation as well.
So I was going to ask you to give a practical example, maybe around the editing company, of how you figured out what actually matters to your client and how you word that. I think his second book, and we can still do that. I would love to hear your feedback on that. So Donald's second book, Marketing Made Simple, he could have titled this book Effective Marketing, How to Book More Clients, How to Grow Your Business, How to Do Anything. But he recognized that my target market, they can find a million ways to grow their business with automation systems and Entrepreneur and all these things. But if I can give them a simplified version, they're more likely to be open to it and then adopt these practices. So what about your own company? How did you do that?
When we started Photographers Edit in 2008, there were 2 or 3 other solutions at the time. Now, of course, there are a lot of different post-production brands, but they were complicated. In fact, the leading competitor, if you will, at the time, super expensive, $600 to $800 to have a wedding processed. Most photographers couldn't afford that. The pricing structure itself was complicated. You had look at a PDF or multi-page PDF, and you literally had to get a calculator out to try to figure out how much it cost. And then there was a waiting list. I think all of the brands at the time that existed, there was some kind of a waiting list because these photographers, ultimately, I think every single company was started by a photographer or a couple of photographers. They had done so, out of their garage, kind of like we do with any business. And they hadn't really thought about scale. So they had this waiting list. So I realized the opportunity, not just to start a post-production company, but to solve, and speaking of solving photographers' challenges.
Yeah.
One was the cost. So I needed to figure out a way to bring the cost down.
Yeah.
Number two, I needed to simplify the whole process significantly. To your point about Donald's book, we're, especially as business owners, most of us don't, myself included, in fact, I don't even have a college degree. Most of us don't have the training in the realm of business and finance and so forth. So we're overwhelmed, generally speaking. So if somebody can offer us a solution that is simple, whatever the challenge at hand, something that's simple, that minimal number of moving parts is the way that I define simple, then that is going to be a lot more appealing. So we came up with a really simple solution. It was affordable, it was simple. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to partner with a company that actually ended up buying into the company years down the road, that was able to help me offer these services at scale.
Cool.
And so when we launched the company, we launched as Classic Post-Production. Classic has its benefits that are pretty obvious, I think, but it also enabled us to simplify the offerings. So instead of offering a ton of different options, which has complicated the whole process, we kept it really simple. And this was just true to life editing for photographers at a price point that way more photographers could afford. Now, fast forward to further answer your question, about 6-7 years ago or so, there was a kind of a shift in the industry. And that same company that was really kind of the lead competitor at the time continued to be for some time. They made a switch and others kind of followed suit where they went from an a la carte pricing model with custom options to a much simpler, cheaper, kind of a lesser service monthly subscription model.
Sure.
And that became very, very popular. And we considered whether or not to go that route. We knew the numbers didn't make sense on paper. And it turns out, well, that was quite accurate. We didn't pursue that business model. And there's a lot more to that story. But very simply, we stuck with the a la carte pricing model. But as they were shifting to a simpler model with less options, yet again, we needed to figure out a way to position ourselves against the primary competition in order to stand out effectively. That's, again, the significance of brand position. So we went from classic post-production or classic editing to custom editing, just a switch in word. But all of our services then backed that idea up. And already we'd been getting feedback from photographers. They were wanting more options. We were able to meet that need while also seeing where the market was going and playing accordingly, and yet again position ourselves against the competition. And we've been leading custom post-production house in the industry now for years. But that shift and the focus, of course, also drove what we did day to day. And that informing of our behavior as business owners through a brand position is a really important concept as well.
Love it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated.
No.
It shouldn't
Not
be.
So many things. We make it complicated.
Yeah.
I'm the first one too.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is going to be the end of part 1. I am bummed we're not going 10 parts into this because I feel like, who knows? I don't know what the future may bring. I'm not going to rule that out. But we are going to pick up on part 2. So be sure to check back on the channel here at the Boudoir Guild for part 2, because we got 3 more fantastic books, and who knows what other kind of knowledge bombs we're going to be dropping. So we'll see you soon.